Welcome to Straight from the Source with Haley Watts, and I'm here today with Matt Plummer, District 4 Supervisor for Shasta County. Welcome, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
So, okay, on a typical Thursday morning, what am I taking you away from right now?
Yeah, there is a whole host of normal committee meetings. So yesterday, for example, we had our at-home committee, which is a group of elected officials from the 3 cities and the county who are focused on homelessness. And then from there rolled into a meeting about potential grant applications for a trail network we're trying to put together north of Shasta Lake. And then we had what's called a community action board, which is a board that's focused on addressing poverty in Shasta County. So yeah, it's a mix of different things, you know, day to day, but that kind of gives you a feel for the different types of things that I'll be involved in on a day-to-day basis.
So homelessness in Shasta County, you were just telling me that you're from New Jersey, right? You've been here 7 years now or so?
Almost 9 years.
9 years.
Yeah.
Now, a lot has changed across our nation in 9 years, but how would you compare the homeless crisis that we have here in Northern California to what you came from?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, well, where I grew up, you didn't really have homelessness in the same sense. I grew up in a small town named Califon, ironically. That's 1 square mile big.
Oh my gosh.
Walked to school, growing up. We had a K-8 school of 150 kids. You're with the same 18 kids for 9 years. So it wasn't quite the same there, but I did live in Boston before moving to Reading. Mm-hmm. And there, one of the big differences between East Coast homelessness and West Coast homelessness is sheltered versus unsheltered. Okay. So on the East Coast, most of the homeless are sheltered, whereas if you look, and it varies a little bit city to city or county to county, but on the West Coast, about half of the homeless tend to be unsheltered. Part of that's due to weather.
I was going to say, it's because the weather's so great.
Yeah, if you're in Boston in the winter, you don't want to be. So that's one of the big drivers. But I would say a lot of the contributing factors in terms of whether high cost of living and shortage of housing or addiction and substance use or mental illness are pretty similar across, the different regions of the country. Yeah,
interesting. Do you feel like in Shasta County right now there is even enough shelter space for people if they wanted it?
So I think if we say shelter space, we want to think about it in 3 buckets probably. Okay. So you have what's called emergency shelters, which would be like the Good News Rescue Mission. And really there's only one emergency shelter in Shasta County.
Right.
Then there is transitional living, which is kind of a step up from that. It's not like where you would just go to stay overnight, but you might stay there for a few months. And then there's permanent housing, right? Mm-hmm. And what we definitely know is that there's a shortage of permanent housing. For example, the county has to submit to the state what's called Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. And so that tells us how many houses in each of the 4 different income brackets we're supposed to build.
Okay.
And so we got a report on this a couple months ago. And we're on an 8-year cycle, so 2020 to 2028. And right now we're way off track in all 4 of those income brackets below market rate. And so we know that in terms of permanent housing, there's certainly a shortage. Yeah. When it comes to transitional living, we've increased our capacity there. I would say that we're still experiencing somewhat of a shortage. When it comes to emergency shelter, I think in terms of the people who are trying to take advantage of it, we have enough. Mm-hmm. But one of the challenges is, and this is actually a big shift that's happened, but one of the challenges is that there's been a portion of the homeless population who hasn't been interested in participating in the one shelter that we do have.
Shelter resistant.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you only have one option, really, it's if a group is like, well, we don't want to participate with that organization.
Is it like the religious thing, or what do they say?
There's been a number of different complaints, you could say, but actually, and we just heard a presentation at that meeting I referenced earlier about the cultural shift that organization has undergone over the last years. Mm-hmm. And for example, they previously, I believe, had over 1,000 people on a no-serve list for various infractions.
If you do something wrong, you're not welcome back.
Right.
Right.
And they've since cleared that list, and now they only have 12 who are on the list. So they're making big changes to try to open and cast kind of a broader net there.
Okay.
And I think that's going to have a positive impact.
You spent the night there, right? You did a sleepover.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
So I spent the night in, they just built this micro shelter village of 17 micro shelters, and I got to stay there. And, honestly, I thought it was pretty nice.
Yeah.
As far as the accommodations, the room is about from me to you,
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
wider than that, but there's a bed there. There was temperature control, and I think the main thing, and this was emphasized also by their director yesterday, is that it's a locked room for someone who probably is used to being in an unsafe environment where anybody could come up on them at any point in time,
Right.
and it's their own private space. And so I think it's a huge addition,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of debate around getting people into housing versus addressing some of the root causes first.
Yeah.
But if somebody isn't in a place where they feel secure, where they feel safe, it's like, how are they going to have a chance at addressing severe mental illness, at getting a job, at saving money so they can pay, the upfront, first month rent or any of that? And so I think that's a major step in the continuum of getting them into permanent housing.
Yeah, I mean, there's something so just crucial about having, maybe it's because I'm a little bit of an introvert, but just having that alone time. Like if the Amazon delivery driver knocks on my door, I'm like, nobody's home. You're showing up at my house uninvited. Like it is important to have that feeling of somewhere you can go and just be you and not be interacting with anyone or anything. And, I love the idea though of the tiny home, and like you were talking about adding more housing. And it's funny, like I have two stepsons. One just graduated high school. The other is still in high school. So 4 more years of, family life. And it's nice
Sure.
to have space for that. But I'm kind of thinking about how wonderful it will be someday to just have such a simple house, little, small space, less to clean, less yard to take care of. I don't know. Have you ever thought of like the tiny home lifestyle?
Well, I think somewhat related to that, so we've been talking about workforce housing in Shasta County, because if you look at what's happened over the last few decades, basically we end up really focusing on large single-family homes on decent-sized lots. And what that means is that for a first-time home buyer, it's really difficult for them to jump into that bracket.
Yeah.
And so if we can create a stepping stone to that, where their first house is, it's maybe 1,200 square feet versus 2,000 square feet, and it's something that they only need, let's say, $25,000, $30,000 to get into. And so right now, actually, and this is something that I'll put out there for the developers in Shasta County, is the county actually has, I believe it's around $1.2, $1.5 million it's called PHLA, I forget what that stands for, but basically can be used to catalyze the construction of workforce housing. And so that's something that we want to invest in Shasta County, is for that middle tier where, there's a lot of government funds that have historically gone to really low income and subsidized housing, and then market rate housing has, increased. We'd like it to increase more, but it has increased at a fairly steady rate. But that in between is where there really needs to be a focus. And so we're looking for developers to use some of these county dollars that we have to start some of these either developments or remodels that could be turned into workforce housing.
Yeah, okay, we'll see. There's a lot, a lot coming. So you've been on as a county supervisor since January of this year, right? Is this your first time in government?
It is, yes.
What do you think, being a politician?
Well, so at least I had the advantage of working on a number of campaigns for probably, I started working on campaigns in 2021. And so I had some experience, at least on the campaigning side, of what it feels like to be around politicians and that whole world. But the thing I love about government, and the reason why I wanted to be involved with it, is because particularly at the county level, I feel like you get to work on some of the most important challenges that a community is facing. We've talked a lot about homelessness, mental illness, substance use, the economic development. Like, these are the key issues that are going to define the region for the next several decades, and the opportunity to be part of helping shape those and move those forward is really an awesome privilege. Now, do I wish that some things can move forward more quickly, that there wasn't as much political drama as there tends to be in some of the issues? Absolutely. So there's definitely things that I hope we can continue to improve on as far as government works. But in terms of the work that we're doing and the opportunities ahead, I'm really excited about it.
Since you've lived in the county for nearly a decade, I'm sure you were well aware that, like, Shasta County in general, it seems like those county supervisors meetings have just been, well, for one thing, interesting to watch. If you stream them and watch them from work, like I have been through COVID and through everything. What is your experience being like on the other side and having such a diverse community that you serve, right? And there are people who, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. There are definitely people who have ideas that are just a little bit different in Shasta County when it comes to what they want from their government, suspicion and a lack of trust in the government, and not only at the state level, the federal level, but at the local level too. Do you feel like your constituents trust you, or have you ever like been scrutinized for anything that you've said or done?
So on the last question, definitely both.
Okay.
So, and I'll in a given week, I'll get emails saying, thank you so much for your thinking on this or for your vote on this, and then also get people calling me names. So, so that's kind of the status quo, I would say, in terms of my experience. I would say that the beautiful thing in Shasta County is that people are really engaged in county level government. In most other places, people are like, county government, what? Like, I don't know, I mean, and we've had, recently we've been doing some recruiting for different positions, so we've had candidates come in from other places, even out of state, and they'll see the room full of residents, and they're like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, this doesn't happen. And so I think that's a real positive, right? That the community is engaged, they care about what happens, they care about the decisions that their elected officials are making. Now, are they always constructive in their comments? No.
Yeah.
And so I think that, Shasta County has a long history of being upset with the way that the state government has gone, and then wanting to find some avenue to push back on that.
Yeah, like more local control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they've, I would say for the most part, since the COVID era, they've chosen the county as kind of that locus of control, where they can kind of push, whether that has to do with elections or COVID mandates or green energy or chemtrails, whatever it might be. The county has become kind of the avenue that people have chosen to kind of express and try to push those things, even though the county government itself often doesn't have the authority to actually make those decisions. And that can create some friction because they're upset with us for not taking action, and we're saying, well, we don't actually have the authority or the ability to do that.
Well, I mean, I think that a lack of trust in elections has been a huge thing at the center of Shasta County, and what people are asking of county government is to help restore faith in elections. And supervisors, before you were part of it, didn't they go to a hand count, and to the extent where the governor said, no, you can't do that, and a law was created to make so something that Shasta County leaders decided couldn't be.
Right.
Now, where things stand now, I mean, there was the switch over to the HART machines to get away from Dominion, right? And then Tom Toller led us through the last election, and there was that whole ink spray issue, not his fault. But I guess all this I'm saying, what do you think it's going to take for people to just trust in the local elections office? I mean, do you have faith in it?
Well, I think it's important. So I like to take a quantitative approach to some of the, most of these questions and say, so, because it's easy to say there isn't trust in the elections, but the question is, like, if you were to survey the public, would you find that there is low trust in our elections? Yeah. Because there's two things that happen. One is you hear the most vocal don't necessarily represent the majority.
Right.
And so that is certainly the case. And so, but also, a lot of people, there's a small portion, I would say maybe 10 to 15% of the population who's like very engaged. But because I knocked on 9,000 doors in my district, and most people, they're wanting government to just kind of like pave the roads, keep us safe, and not have homeless people in their yard. And they don't really care.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably appropriate. I mean, they're busy, right? And so those people I don't think are really thinking about it. So I tried to, about a year ago, actually get some real data on this in terms of trust in the election. So I did a survey. I sent out an email newsletter. And people say, oh, that's bias. And certainly there's selection bias included in it. But what I found is that the vast majority of people who responded to my survey, which was about 1% of the total population in Shasta County, so about 1,000 folks, so decent sample size, found that there was actually high trust in elections. Now, what and people would say, people disputed that, but what I asked is, because we have an election commission, right? And I asked them, because their mandate, as it was written before I was on the board, was to increase trust in elections.
Right.
So they've been theoretically in operations, and I say theoretically because right now they're suspended, but for about a year and a half. And so I said, well, if your mandate is to increase trust in elections, then you should do an annual survey to assess it, to see if what you're doing is actually working.
Right.
Because we want to assess evaluate you on that. And so I hope that we'll move towards that, so that we actually have good data where we can say, yeah, actually as a population, we feel that there is high trust, or there isn't, or it's improving or not improving.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just background. I think what was interesting with former ROV Toller was that he came in very skeptical, and then he ended up feeling pretty confident in that.
Yeah.
And so, I think the group that's suspicious of it, they have a new ROV who's sympathetic to their interest and cause. And so I think if they're going to identify things that give us real reason for suspicion, now is their chance between now and basically the next ROV election, where that could change again.
Right.
And so I hope that they do so in a robust way, and that if there are things that we should be concerned about, that they bring those forward in a way that we can really prove those. And if not, then we can move forward.
One of the calls on our list of assignments to make today is regarding an email I got last night from someone saying that 2 people just resigned at the elections office. Have you heard anything about that?
I hadn't heard that, no.
Okay, I guess we'll find out. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Yeah. The new ROV, though, he's not Clint
Curtis.
Clint Curtis, that's right. He's not from our area, right?
No, he, as far as I know, he was residing in Florida.
And you didn't vote to approve him, right? You were against it. What was your main objection there?
So there was a number, I gave 4 reasons. Let's see if I can remember them now a month later. But so I think, when it comes down to it, he doesn't have experience running an actual election. So he has experience theoretically as an election lawyer.
Okay.
So we had actually 3 candidates who had experience running elections, 1 who had experience running them in Shasta County. So that, in terms of doing the job of it, that would be immediate more points for those 3. And then when it came to some things, so I think running an election and being a county clerk is a highly detailed job. When I looked at his resume, there were a lot of inconsistencies or things that didn't add up or that were different from what he shared during the interview. And so if you're going to apply for a job, you want to make sure that everything really is buttoned up and makes sense and the dates follow and all that. If you're applying for a job that requires you to be highly detailed, and I didn't find that was consistent.
Yeah.
I also asked him during the interview, he was proposing a certain system for taking pictures of all the ballots at these different points in times. And so he's been at this election story, I'll say, for 20 years. And so I asked him, how many communities have you worked with that have adopted that? And he said none.
Right.
And then I said, well, okay, you've been an election lawyer, I forget at this point, it might have been 8 or 12 years. How many lawsuits have you won? And he couldn't name one. He kind of referenced one, and then he kind of pulled back on it. So I was like, well, if communities over the last 20 years have rejected this, if you haven't won any lawsuits, that's not a proven track record of success. That makes me feel confident that you'll implement something here that will be successful.
Right. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is an elected position, right? And so this is a temporary situation, and if the work that he does is something that the community likes, then he'll stay in place, and if not, people get the representative they want, and that's key to our democracy, right?
Well, and that was actually another point. So the board was required to appoint someone here.
Right.
Because it's an elected position, I believe the board should have appointed someone that reflected the will of the voters the most, because it's an elected position. I also was supportive of, we had which Supervisor Cry had put forth on to basically amend our charter county that would have allowed the board to send this to a special election. That was voted on in November of 2024. I supported that, despite a lot of people questioning my support for that. That did not pass. And so I think if that had passed, it would have been good to just push that to a special election. But because it wasn't, I still think we should have done what the will of the voters was in that, versus our will as a board. And there, I think it was pretty clear that the majority of people, whether you looked at public comments, emails that we received, or a poll that was done by the Record Searchlight, that the vast majority of people supported Joanna. And so I think that that would have been another reason to support her candidacy there. But like you said, we'll see next year.
What do you think about her being fired?
I wasn't surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think, and I don't know the details of it, but I think I would have appreciated if Clinton Curtis had, you know, met with her and you know, invited her thoughts and kind of seen if there could be a working relationship. From what I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, but from what I've heard, that didn't happen. And I think that was, you know, unfortunate. But, you know, he obviously wants to steer things in a direction that is different from how things have been run in the past. And so it's not surprising.
So speaking of working relationships, how is your relationship with the other supervisors? Are you all able to disagree and not have it become a personal thing? Or have there been certain issues where it's really hard to get along with people?
I think we've had a much better working relationship than, let's say, the past board. And I think we've tried hard to maintain a level of respect, have healthy disagreement. I would say that hasn't always been achieved, and that there have been some personal attacks and stuff that is unnecessary, and that makes it harder. But I think we're, you know, what I try to do is, you know, look past, okay, the meeting's over, now let's put that behind us and look to the next one.
Right.
And, you know, not kind of harbor those things as we go into the next decision. And so I think for the most part, we've been able to do that in a, you know, much better fashion than maybe the past board. Yeah,
definitely. Okay. What does your family think of Shasta County?
Oh, they love it. I have 3 girls. They all go to this local charter school where my wife teaches. She teaches high school, so not them at this point, but so they're really immersed in that community there. And then, you know, we love the outdoors. Sometimes I have to kind of push our younger girls to, like we just hiked Mount Eddy, which is the tallest peak in Trinity Alps, and last weekend for Father's Day, and so having access to that is awesome, and so
that's one of my favorite things about being up here. Have you hiked Castle Crags?
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorites. Yeah.
It's like Yosemite
or
something like that. And then Dunsmuir has that railroad park. Have you stayed there yet?
I haven't stayed there, but
it's so cool. You get to stay in like an actual train car, and that's your hotel room for the night. There's nothing like this area, and there's something so special, especially around like Lake Shasta. Have you been to the caverns since they did the new lighting yet?
Yeah, so actually last week they had a reopening ceremony, and so I was able to join, and it's especially the cathedral room at the end where they. Oh yeah. Have you gotten to see
I haven't seen the new lighting. I went there 1 year ago, and I thought it was amazing then, so I can only imagine.
Well, they actually have a light and sound show at the end there. Let me, and so that was awesome. It took it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, that's really cool. We were both just talking about how when you talk for a living, our throats are always sore and strange.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I used to have a much higher pitched voice before this job, and it's just gotten so gravelly, I swear. It's funny. Yeah. It comes with the whole public speaking thing. Did you ever envision this for yourself as kind of what you would do, is just be, I mean, it's in a weird way almost like you're like a celebrity within your community and a decision maker. There's a lot of power to it.
Yeah, I mean, I was never growing up really interested in government or politics, and so even it wasn't until probably about like 10 or 12 years ago that I started really following politics, and at that point I was just kind of like, oh, maybe I should actually know what's going on, you know, a little bit, and so it's really been more of a recent area of interest. And I would say that what happened for me is first, so I graduated in 2009, so it was the Great Recession. A lot of my friends were getting jobs, and then the companies that they had jobs with were no more within a few months. And so I ended up getting a job with a company kind of like Amazon, but for industrial supplies. And so I was living in Cleveland, which the auto industry had collapsed. Lived right on the Cuyahoga River, where you have all these tool and die shops, little machine shops that had basically supported that auto industry and been part of the ecosystem. And now they were abandoned, they were shut down. And so my wife and I on the weekends, we would walk along the river and we'd see this, and what I really began thinking about is, okay, what happens to those people who had worked there for 30 years and now don't have a job? Like, what happens to this community that had been defined around this and now doesn't have that?
Right.
And those were not the questions I was answering as a parcel packing assembly manager. And so I really became interested in this idea of like solving community and social problems. And so that was kind of the bug that then I left that and joined a consulting firm that was focused on nonprofits, foundations, and philanthropists and helping them increase their impact. And I would say ultimately that's kind of why I got involved in government, is because I saw that increasingly government was a key vehicle for addressing the social problems and the challenges in the community. And a lot of them, honestly, were getting worse, even though we were investing more resources in them. And so that was a key reason for getting into it.
Yeah. What do you think about, it's interesting, some people think like nonprofits, like it sounds so great and they're doing this good work, but if you give money, it's like how much actually goes to solving the problem versus the bureaucracy, whatever that means. I mean, do you feel like for the most part that a lot of the functioning organizations out there are just, doing their best, well-intentioned?
I think, so there's a few different ways I would answer this. One is that ultimately people and organizations, I believe, act in, for the most part, in the way that the incentive structure around them drives them to act. And so that's the beauty of capitalism and businesses, is that the incentives align. If I deliver a good product or service, then you're going to pay for it and I'll make money. And so it benefits both sides.
Yeah.
The challenge with nonprofits is that you've taken what was a customer in business and you've broken it into two categories typically.
Okay.
So you have the beneficiary who receives the service, and then you have the funder who's paying for it. So I can deliver bad services to the beneficiary, but still convince the funder to give me money.
Right.
And that's where you have a disconnect because the incentives don't align there. And so that can become problematic and cause inefficiencies or cause them to deliver suboptimal results or to not even be accountable to results. Now, seeing kind of the nonprofit world at a bird's eye view for a number of years, I think we've made significant progress in moving towards nonprofits delivering better results, being more accountable for them. In terms of kind of the funding of bureaucracy or overhead or admin, whatever term people want to use, that was actually something that I spent a lot of time on when I was at this consulting firm.
Okay.
Because we would call it the nonprofit starvation cycle. Because yes, you don't want to spend a whole bunch of money on the back office, right? You want it to go to the kids, right? But the problem with that is that if you limit it too much, you actually starve the nonprofit from being able to measure their results, from being able to invest in growth and development of their program or services. And so you end up with these small nonprofits that don't have the capacity to do anything significant or grow beyond their current means. And so if you're not willing to invest in that overhead, so to speak, then you actually limit the ability of them to. So what at the time, and this is still one of the lines of thinking is, nothing more than 10%. But that's just an arbitrary number that somebody threw a dart at, right?
Right.
And so we actually did work to try to calculate, and we split nonprofits, I believe at this point, I think it was 6 or 8 different categories. And we said, what are the true overhead costs for those? And we analyzed in extensive detail the finances of all of them. And we calculated kind of an average overhead rate by type of nonprofit. I know this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but the point is that we can't arbitrarily say, well, we should just give you a very small amount because then we'll actually limit their ability to have impact.
Right.
But we need to create an incentive structure that causes them to, when they deliver results, they get more funding. And that we link those two together. And it's the same thing for government, and this is something that I'm pushing for. If you think about the incentive structure for government, it's basically to be compliant with the law, because government hates getting sued and hates being liable, and to get money out the door that comes through, so spend money.
Right.
There actually is almost no incentive for government to deliver community benefit, because they're not held. Their money isn't tied to that. Tax dollars will still come in whether they deliver, whether the roads are better or not.
Right.
And so, how do you create an incentive structure for government that actually incentivizes them? And that's where, and we're currently working on a strategic planning process. But I believe if the county has goals that are community benefit goals, and that then those are published and we track our data towards them, that then the public officials will be held accountable for them. which then the public officials will hold staff accountable for it.
Yeah.
And it will have a trickle-down effect so that the incentives are actually aligned to deliver a benefit to the community for the dollars that are paid in taxes.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. What are some of your big goals personally for Shasta County in your time as an elected official?
The three that I talked about throughout the whole campaign period and that remain true are reducing homelessness, cutting crime, and fixing our roads.
Right.
Fixing our roads was actually not something that was like really on my radar until I started knocking on doors, and then people kept saying it over, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's see what we can do here. And so homelessness, when we come to that issue, and we've talked about this a bit already, but it's not just homelessness; it's a constellation of issues. So it's also mental illness, it's substance use, it's housing development.
Right.
And so all three of those kind of connect to that, and how do we address it? So those would be seeing progress on all of those fronts. When it comes to crime, there are a number of interrelated issues, some that overlap with homelessness, some that don't. So obviously mental illness, more than half of those in the county jail are on psychotropic medications. So that's a huge portion are suffering from significant mental illness who are in the jail, or are, if we look at those who are on opioid use disorder and need medicated assisted treatment, that's a huge portion of that population as well. So those connect to those issues, but then it's figuring out how do we actually use the time that we have them in custody to reduce the risk that they commit crimes in the future.
Right.
And so the sheriff has a great, kind of initial concept there of the alternative custody program. We're looking to secure 90 acres from the city down in South Reading. That could be a new campus where we could really, because right now the current jail is very limited in its ability to provide any of that. You're basically in your cell for 20 hours a day, and you come out and you can watch TV or a little, something like that.
How is that going to help anybody?
Yeah, it's not. It's actually going to...
All it does is, like maybe take someone, it protects the public for a very small window of time, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, I think some of the other pieces are, so when we release someone, how do we ensure that we're setting them up for success so that they don't walk out of the jail and walk over to the liquor store?
Which happens. We get the emails. They do the same thing, and they're back in the jail the same day. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are kind of the key issues. When it comes to the roads, they're thinking through how do we, it basically comes down to a funding issue. That's a much simpler one. It's like, do we have enough money to cover this many roads? Unfortunately, with the gas tax going down on a per population basis because of fuel efficiency and electric vehicles, we're actually, the amount of money that we'll get from that to pay for our roads will continue to decline until the state comes up with another way of addressing that. But
what is the worst road that you've driven on in Shasta County?
There's some out off of kind of in the Bella Vista area.
Yeah.
There's Dry Creek Road, which is not that bad, but then roads off of there that are pretty intense.
It's like bumpy. It can mess up your alignment if you take it every single day.
Oh yeah.
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 So are you in favor of the gas tax then? I mean, California gas prices are so crazy, right? I know that there's a lot that goes into it. Some of it's environmental. I think there are certain standards that they have to be up to for emissions. I don't know. What's the fix there?
Yeah, I mean, and so this is a statewide issue, but I did look into this in a lot of detail before I started running for county supervisor. And the thing is, so if you take the gas tax away, or you suspend the gas tax, which I know Republicans wanted to do in the state legislature a few years ago, the problem is then you actually strip that money away from investing in our infrastructure.
Right.
And our infrastructure is not, great right now. So that would be a problem. And also, if you look at the price of gas, so I don't know what it is statewide average, but by us it's like $4 to $4.50. And if you look at the gas tax, as of July 1st, because every year it increases, unless they decide not to, it will be 62 cents is the gas tax. So that's a sizable portion, but it's actually not the key driver of the high prices.
What is?
So, and I'm not an expert on this, but from what I can tell from the research is basically the state government has put a lot of restrictions and constraints on how we produce oil and then how we refine that into gas. And so that process, you've probably heard about how the number of refineries in the state has gone down. The other challenge is that, for example, we can't use any gas/oil from Texas in California. It's a different type of crude, right? And actually the physical infrastructure of pipelines is not even connected. So like we can't use it. So we basically are isolated in a sense of where we get it. And so this is one of the things that's kind of funny about the state, because they've really limited domestic production in the state, but that just means that we're producing that from Ecuador or from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Colombia or some of these other countries. So basically, I think if the state government wanted to reduce the price of the gas, which I'm not sure that they want to do, but if they wanted to do that, I think they would have to reduce regulations on both the production and the refinement of oil and gas.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I like to complain because I don't like to fill up my tank for $5 a gallon, it seems like. And anywhere else I travel in the country, it seems so unfair. How are they doing it so much better than us? But then I do look at, like when I was living in, my sister was living in Houston for a while. And when I would visit her there, we'd see flooded roads with the slightest bit of rain and no sidewalks in certain areas. So, yeah, I guess you get what you pay for to a certain extent.
And I think that's the key thing for government is, I think, and I actually, when I was knocking on doors, one person told me, like, they said, I would be okay if my taxes were a little bit higher if that empty lot next to my house was turned into like a park.
Yeah.
And so I think the real question is not so much are you paying a lot or are you paying a little, but are you getting the appropriate value for what you're paying?
Yeah.
And I think largely in California, people feel like, no, we're not getting the value for it. We're paying a lot, and that might be okay if we were getting the value, but I don't think
Caltrans has a good branding. Have you seen their signs where you'll see the crews at work and it'll say your tax dollars?
Yes,
that's smart, right? Because
Absolutely.
people want to know, where's my money going, like you said. Nobody wants to just be throwing away money that doesn't actually come back to them in some way.
Yes, totally.
We're not all philanthropists,
Yeah. We don't want to be philanthropists to the government, for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Speaking of the government, so I feel like maybe when you first got elected, that Governor Newsom came to Reading, right? And correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I have this perception that you and Assemblywoman Hadwick were the only two local leaders invited, and other county supervisors weren't. What was the situation there?
Yeah, so he actually came in December before I took office.
Oh, okay, right.
So he was coming to speak to a group. We have a kind of a collaborative group called North State Together and Reach Higher Shasta, which is largely focused on education pathways and from cradle to career, whole collaborative. And I believe it's been part of this whole effort around Jobs First and that statewide initiative. And the state had given them money for planning. They had produced a report. And so that was kind of the topic. I was not actually involved in that work at all, I just received an email, the night before inviting me to come, and so I said I would come.
Right.
And then when I got there, they asked if I would come stand back there, and so I was happy to. That's something that I've supported. I brought forth a proclamation in February to proclaim, as the federal government did, that would be Career and Technical Education Month, because I think, if we look at Shasta County, I think, and the broader North State, we can be a hub for training people in the trades and in these, firefighting careers, nurses, where there's significant shortages statewide and nationwide.
Yeah.
And we actually have both some of the infrastructure set up and the people who are, equipped to do really well in that space. And so that's why that has been something that I've wanted to advance and put forward as something that could be a defining feature of Shasta County.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah.
We've had our issues with that, the press office there too. They're very strategic about how they want their press conferences to look, that's for sure. Yeah. The doctor shortage that has been kind of the big topic this week. When you guys moved here about a decade ago, were you able to find a good pediatrician for your kids and everything? I had the same doctor for 25 years where I came from, and since I've been in Chico, which also has a healthcare crisis, I've had 4 different primaries, 3 different OBGYNs. They come and then they leave. No one's sticking around here. What's going on is it impacting your family?
I would say from a pediatrician standpoint, a little bit, but it hasn't been dramatic. Like we've been able to kind of plug in and switch at different points in times and that type of thing. So there hasn't been a huge, I think for a while, finding for my wife and I, like a primary care physician was challenging.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the felt experience of it is certainly challenging. And I think to some extent that's happening across the state, aside from maybe some, really densely populated urban areas. And so, yeah, certainly something that's top of mind for people and that a lot of people are experiencing, particularly if you look at in Shasta County, if you rewind about 20 years, 15% of our population was 65 and older. Now that's 21%. And so as a population, we're getting older. And so medical care goes up as you age. And so that is increasing the need for that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. One doctor that I was speaking to, because I'm interviewing everybody, even if I'm at a doctor's appointment, and I was asking him, what do you think the deal is with it? Why do doctors keep leaving Chico? And his theory was sort of like that doctors don't want to live in rural areas. And I can't fathom why, because I love living in this community, and Redding, Shasta County is similar. I mean, do you think that's part of it, is that they don't want to stay, that maybe they come just for a couple of years to get experience and then take a bigger, better job in a bigger city because they just don't want to live somewhere rural?
I don't think it's like necessarily rural versus urban, but what I do hear in talking with the healthcare executives in our community is, doctors make a good bit of money, and they, and they work hard and they've gone through tons of training, and so they want to have avenues to spend that money in ways that increase their quality of life, their enjoyment of their life. And so if they feel like in a community that there isn't really, venues that match kind of that level of experience, I'll call it, then they probably are going to be looking for other places that offer that. Now, if you get somebody who loves mountain biking or kayaking or bass fishing and is a doctor, they'd have ample opportunity to do that in Redding, for example. But a lot of times I think they have a decent disposable income and they're looking for avenues to do that. And then I think there's also kind of a bit of a peer factor as well. Like if you look at the number of physicians, at least in Shasta County and Redding, it's reasonably low. And so I think they like spending time with other physicians, other people who have that educational experience, who are used to kind of talking about topics in, a certain way that has more of an academic, and so I think they're looking for a peer network and experiences.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. So for you, when you're not functioning as your career as a politician, what is like on your free time? Like, who are you and what do you like to do?
I really love hiking. And so I've climbed Mount Shasta twice, done Mount Whitney. I have kind of gone into long distance running. So I had run some longer distances, but not like in an official capacity until in April I ran a half marathon. And then actually this Saturday I'm running a 34K, which is 21.4 miles.
Wow.
So,
where is that at?
It's called the Headwaters Trails, and it's up by Lake Siskiyou. So it's actually in Siskiyou County. And which the distance would be fine, but it's a 4,100 foot elevation gain. And so that's what I'm a little nervous about. We'll see how that goes. But love being outdoors and kind of pushing. I like to push my limits or, do something that's a little bit of a stretch in that sense. So.
I used to run, I still run, I'll do like 3 miles with my dogs, but I used to do half marathons. I never did the full one though. But I went through a phase where, did you ever read like David Goggins' book or like, there's some ultra marathon runners out there, and people who do that are just a different breed, because it does take this sort of like tenacity of your mind, right? To get into that zone where it's like, I'm not thinking about my physical comfort, I'm just doing something, and it's separate from all the creature comforts of the world. And there's a certain, for me at least, like this level of self-worth that I would get from it in terms of just knowing I could, put aside all of the resistance that's making me feel like I'd rather be kicking my feet up, I want to stop. And I don't know. I loved that aspect of it, the mental aspect, more so than the physical even.
I love that too, and I think it's a really great lesson for life, because there are times when you're running and you're like, oh man, I need to stop. Like I'm done. And if you can sustain that, you actually, like, maybe a mile later, you're like, oh, I feel good again.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a great, lesson for life of, like,
right.
A lot of times we feel like we need to quit, but actually if we kept going, we'd get to a place where we could sustain it again.
Yeah.
So.
Have you ever come across anything crazy, like out in the woods on a jog? Any like cool wildlife or anything bizarre happen to you?
I wouldn't say any really coal wildlife. I mean, I've seen a bear on the Sacramento River Trail. Obviously, actually, I was running by Shasta Dam the other day, and there was a little red fox right on the side of the road.
Cool.
That was just kind of, and then I ran past it, and it started following me up the hill. I was like, oh, this could be interesting, but it turned off eventually. So.
Do you think there are people who actually live below Mount Shasta?
What do you mean?
You haven't heard about this? There's
No.
like, okay, it's like urban legend that there are like people who live, maybe at one point they, pulled back from society and they live beneath the mountain, like in the caves and caverns in there. And people like in Mount Shasta, I know that's not Shasta County, but it's not far. So a lot of people who hike and stuff, they, aside from like Bigfoot sightings too, that's another kind of a legend in Northern California. So be on the lookout.
Yeah, I'll have to keep my eyes open.
People.
I mean, I've been to the headwaters of the Sacramento, which is up there. And, that's kind of an interesting little spot there.
You might see some cave people on your run that you have coming up next week. I'll have to keep you posted and let me know.
I will let you know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt, for being here. Thank you so much. There's so many more things we could talk about, but it was great to pick your brain, and I look forward to seeing what comes next.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening today. I decided to offer this podcast after enough of you let me know that you wanted a deeper dive into certain stories than you get on our TV broadcasts. We elect certain people to represent our voice, but who are they really? My hope is that this podcast answers that question. I love your feedback, and I want to know who you'd like to hear from next. Just fill out that comment section and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify.